Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's Meet the Analyst webinar, The Social Commerce Opportunity, Unpacking the Potential of Discovery-Based Shopping, Gen Z, and TikTok Shop. I'm your host, Jeremy Goldman, Senior Director of Client Briefings here at Insider Intelligence in our global headquarters in New York's Financial District. And I'm joined by my colleague, Principal Analyst Jasmine Enberg, who is in LA. Hi, Jasmine. Great to have you here.
Hi, Jeremy. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. And before we get into the main presentation today, I'd like to thank Smartly.io for making today's webinar possible and welcome Sarah Hiraki, Head of Creative, EMEA and APAC at Smartly.io. She's joining us from London. Hey, Sarah.
Hey, Jeremy. Hey, Jasmine. Great to be with you.
Happy to have you. But a few things before we dive in, very quick. We have a ton of information to share, but there's no need to take notes if you'd rather not. We will be emailing you a link to view the slides and the full recording of today's presentation after, but we do want you to participate. So just use the chat window on the right of the video feed to submit questions at any time during the presentation. We will get to as many as we can during the Q&A at the end of the session. So without further ado, Jasmine, let's get started.
Thank you, Jeremy, and hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you all today, talking about one of my absolute favorite topics within social media, which is, of course, none other than social commerce. And over the next 25 minutes or so, we are going to be unpacking the potential of discovery-based shopping, Gen Z, and TikTok Shop. In true insider intelligence fashion, we've got a ton of data and charts to go through. So I'm just going to give you a quick peek at the agenda before we jump on in. So first, we're going to size up the social commerce opportunity. We're going to present our brand new forecast for social commerce sales, and then we'll dig in a little bit deeper into spending trends and buyer trends. Then we're going to move on and talk about the nuances of the social commerce experience, talk a little bit about how it compares to traditional e-commerce and the different experiences on all of the platforms. We'll focus pretty heavily on discovery. We'll talk again about the unique aspects, and then I'll share our new forecast for the top players within social commerce here in the US. Then we're going to unbox TikTok Shop. We'll talk about TikTok's overall strategy, including its Amazon-like flywheel, focus on Gen Z, and also talk about why creators are the key to making TikTok Shop work. Finally, we'll end on why search is going to be the next big commerce battleground. So if any of you have been following the news recently about social commerce, you've probably seen headlines like these. The one on the left comes from The Information, and it's all about Meta's abandoned shopping cart. And the one on the right is from the Wall Street Journal, talking about how some TikTok Shop merchants have had trouble selling their merchandise. And when you read these headlines, it becomes really easy to dismiss social commerce, but not so fast. At Insider Intelligence, we are seeing that social commerce sales have continued to rise steadily. So this year, we're expecting sales to reach about $67 billion, and that figure is going to almost double by 2026. Now, when we talk about social commerce in our forecast, what we're talking about is any purchase that is originated on a social platform, regardless of where the final transaction takes place. So that means that people could be clicking on a link in an ad or a piece of creator or user-generated content, and then completing the purchase on a brand or retailer site, or it could mean that people are checking out using a social platform's proprietary or native checkout tools like Meta Checkout. What we're also seeing is that social commerce is getting stickier. We produced a forecast for average annual social commerce sales per buyer, and this year we're expecting that figure to be at about $627. And that's also going to nearly double by 2027. And what's really interesting here is that this growth isn't necessarily coming from people making a larger ticket purchase on social platforms, but rather that they're making more purchases. And these are still relatively small ticket purchases, meaning that the average shopping cart value for each individual purchase isn't getting larger, but they're coming back to social media to make more purchases. And that's why we can say that social commerce is getting stickier. Once buyers have bought once, they're returning to buy again. But it is getting harder to convert new buyers. So if you think back to that growth that you saw in the first slide that I showed, most of it is really coming from existing buyers upping their spend on purchases rather than new buyers coming in. Again, average annual spending per buyer will nearly double between 2023 and 2027. But that's not to say that there is no buyer growth. We're going to add another 11 million new social buyers between 2023 and 2027. But that influx of new social buyers that we saw, particularly during the pandemic, is largely over, at least for now. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One, there's a soft ceiling to social buying. And what I mean by this is that the number of buyers can never surpass the total number of social users per platform, And contrary to what you might have seen in the media, social media is not dead. There are new social network users coming in every year, and social buyer growth is only slightly faster than total social user growth, which is going to keep the share of social users who are buyers at roughly 50% through the end of our forecast period. And of course, not every social user is going to convert into a buyer. There are plenty of reasons why people use social media, and shopping and buying is one of them. So last year, we conducted a survey to figure out more about what's going on with those 50% of buyers who are non-buyers on social media. And we asked them what's holding them back from buying. And the number one reason why people aren't making purchases on social media are trust-related issues. So if you look at the responses here on the right, you can see that 44% of respondents said they preferred not to give social media platforms their payment information. About 32% said they preferred not to give social media companies more of their personal information, specifically shopping history. And about 29% said they didn't know whether the products shown, advertised, or promoted on social media platforms were legitimate. Those are all trust-related issues, and we already know that social platforms have struggled quite a bit with this issue of trust. But there's also established retailer loyalties and shopping habits, and those are a close second in terms of why people don't buy on social media. Consumer behavior can be really difficult to change, and people already have relationships and a lot of trust with the brands and retailers that they're already shopping and buying from. And finally, alluding back to that previous slide, there's existing social media usage preferences, which can be a strong barrier to shopping and buying on social media.
By the way, Jasmine, just to interrupt for a second,
Sure.
I think this is, it's really interesting. And I think part of the thing that, we've seen in our research is that unlike something like retail media, where that people are essentially in shopping mode, a lot of social media advertising designed to, fuel social commerce, it's kind of interruptive, right? So it just seems to me that it's going to be difficult to get certain people on board when they're doing something else, they're engaged in it, and you're trying to, create a path to purchase when they're not necessarily interested in that moment.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, and we're going to talk about both of those things, about whether social media users are in shopping mode, and also about the creative and making sure that it's native to the experience on each platform. But first, I'm going to tell you the good news, which is that Gen Z could eventually break that soft ceiling that I was talking about. Gen Zers are already more likely to make purchases on social media than older generations are. Back in that survey that I was talking about that we conducted last year, about 50% of Gen Zers had made at least one purchase on social media in the previous year, which was higher than every other generation, except for millennials, which were roughly on par. And Gen Z are still forming their shopping habits, they're still forming their retailer loyalties, and they're less concerned about trust. We have seen this latter piece recently many times, particularly in terms of the TikTok ban. And as Gen Z grows up and as they make up more of the social user base, which you can see here on the chart on the right, their preferences are going to redefine how social media is used, as well as how people shop online. So speaking of redefining or defining, I wanted to take a moment just to talk about the differences between social commerce and e-commerce. And these two terms are not synonymous, although there is some overlap and more so recently. But overall, when you're thinking about social commerce, it really is a discovery-based shopping experience. People aren't necessarily going to social media with the intent to buy, but they're inspired to do so from the content that they engage with as they're spending time on these platforms. Social commerce is really about inspiration, it's about trends, it's about FOMO, and creating demand for products that people didn't necessarily know that they wanted or needed. And that's also one reason why discretionary items still make up the majority of social commerce purchases. It is so much easier to be inspired to buy clothes or makeup or jewelry than it is toilet paper. It's not impossible. There have been plenty of viral shopping trends that have made even mundane household items like sponges or cleaning supplies really fly off the virtual and physical shelves. And then when you're thinking about e-commerce, it's more intent-driven. So people are generally turning to e-commerce sites like Amazon when they have a specific product in mind, or at least when they're in a purchasing mindset. They're not necessarily spending a ton of time on these types of platforms because they already know what it is that they want to get. It's not as much about inspiration, but we are seeing e-commerce platforms lean more heavily into that. You know, Amazon, of course, has a TikTok-like feed called Inspire, but regardless of what it's called, we know that people aren't necessarily going there for that kind of shopping activity. So we also asked in that same survey I talked about earlier, what drives buyers to purchase? And this helps us dig in a little bit deeper into this idea of discovery and inspiration. So when we asked buyers what was the reason that they made their most recent purchase on social media, 40%, the highest share, said it was simply because they found something that they liked. About 30% said it was because they saw an ad for it, which was on par with the number of people who said it was because they saw a deal, an offer, or a coupon. And again, what this says to me is that people aren't necessarily going on social media thinking that they're going to buy something, but they're stumbling across something in their feed, in stories, or even in DMs or group chats, and they're making a purchase because they're inspired to do so. Or maybe they saw a deal or an offer that was just too good to resist. It's also important to note, however, that social commerce is an umbrella term. It isn't necessarily one size fits all. The shopping experiences on Snapchat, Pinterest, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook are going to be different, although they are getting more similar as the social platforms look more alike. But I think, you know, the best example of how these experiences can be different is Facebook Marketplace. It, of course, is Facebook's primarily C2C shopping destination. Brands can have listings, they can place ads, but it's mainly a place where consumers will go to buy secondhand goods from other users. Interestingly, it's also one of the few areas of Facebook where Gen Z spends time and money. You can see that in the chart here on the right. But I also bring up Facebook Marketplace for another reason, because it is one of the biggest reasons, if not the biggest, for Facebook's continued big lead in social commerce. So here is our latest forecast for social buyers by platform, and you can see that Meta still commands the largest buyer base. Facebook is well ahead of both sister platform Instagram. It's also well ahead of TikTok, although you can see that nice growth curve for TikTok there. But there is plenty of third-party research that shows that if you were to remove Facebook Marketplace from the overall Facebook buyer figure, the number of Facebook buyers would drop below that of Instagram. Our forecast, of course, includes Facebook Marketplace. But we also split up our forecast in a number of different ways. And by one really important metric, TikTok is actually in first place. So if you're looking at the number of platform users who are buyers, TikTok is in first place as of this year. So there will be about 37.4% of TikTok users will make at least one purchase, which is ahead of both Facebook and Instagram. And that is a perfect segue into our larger discussion about TikTok. And I wanted to start by zooming out and taking sort of a bird's eye view of, you know, TikTok's overall strategy and what it is trying to accomplish. And that is that it's building this digital powerhouse, and it is taking a page out of Amazon's playbook in order to do so. It is really building this Amazon-like flywheel that is comprised of three pillars: media, advertising, and commerce. And while these flywheels might look very similar, they are quite different. So if you think about Amazon's flywheel, which of course is how it was able to rise up, challenge the duopoly, and effectively turn it into a triopoly within the digital landscape, But if you look at the flywheel itself, it is really based first on commerce. That is Amazon's core business. And then it has expanded into media through Prime Video. It's expanded into advertising through Amazon Ads. And all of these three pillars work to support each other and really keep this flywheel spinning. At its core, and what is fueling the flywheel, of course, is Amazon Prime, its subscription service. Now, in terms of TikTok's flywheel, it started with media, which is best exemplified by the For You page, where it's a seemingly endless amount of content that is served algorithmically to users based on their preferences. TikTok also has an incredibly strong ad business. It is the fastest growing social network in terms of ad revenues this year. It's also going to be growing faster than both Amazon and Google, but it's still not quite big enough on its own to really have catapulted TikTok to digital juggernaut status. So it needs to add that third pillar, which of course is commerce. And that's where TikTok Shop comes in. And where all of this media and advertising prowess that it already has is working to support that as well. But what's really important is that at the core and what is fueling TikTok's flywheel, of course, are creators. So now let's turn and talk a little bit more about TikTok Shop and particularly how media and advertising work to support sales on the platform. So TikTok has mastered media. According to our latest forecast, adult Gen Zers will spend a movie's worth of time on TikTok daily in 2023. And if you think back to what I was saying earlier about inspiration being a driver, or the main driver of purchase on social, it's really the more time spent, the more opportunities there are to inspire users to make a purchase. Of course, it's not just Gen Zers who spend an enormous amount of time on TikTok. Our forecast also shows that TikTok passed Instagram in total daily minutes in 2022, and it's also going to surpass Facebook in 2025.
By the way, Jasmine, if I can just jump in,
Sure.
I think this is one of those undersold stories. You know, I think that obviously we work with a lot of sophisticated brands, but then there are some who are not even aware of the fact that, you know, between Gen X and baby boomers, there are about 17 million, US consumers on the platform. There are about 34 million millennials. So it's not really all Gen Z. It's kind of evolved past that over the last 2 years.
It certainly isn't. It's not just a Gen Z story. We're seeing, time spent on TikTok really rise across generations. But when we're thinking about shopping overall, it is Gen Z, however, that is going to give TikTok the edge. So we ran a survey recently looking at social media behaviors of Gen Zers. And what we found was that shopping and product discovery is still an area that's up for grabs among them. So they had clear go-to platforms for some activities like long videos, short videos, and watching stories. But this was an area that is still where the platforms are still jockeying for go-to status. That said, over half of Gen Zers said they shopped on TikTok in the past month, and close to 30% consider TikTok to be the go-to shopping platform. And that was ahead of every other platform that was measured in this survey, which you can see really gives TikTok a leg up in shopping and buying. Creators are also going to make a huge difference. If you think back to that flywheel, that's what was at the core. It's what's fueling TikTok's flywheel. And that's because creators package up and they deliver inspiration to social users. TikTok is already the top platform for creator product recommendations among Gen Z, per this data from IZEA. And we've already seen that over 100,000 US creators have signed up for TikTok Shop Affiliate, which is, of course, a way for them to earn a commission on sales from TikTok Shop. Now, some of you might be thinking, yes, but there was so much irritation and annoyance among users when TikTok Shop videos were flooding the platform right after launch. And yes, that's true. But a lot of that angst has died down. And what we've seen repeatedly throughout the history of social media is that anytime new features are introduced, people get irritated, eventually they settle, and it just becomes part of the experience. That said, TikTok is still taking a really big risk with Shop. It is expected to lose about $500 million in the US this year. A lot of those losses are going to be coming from hiring as well as setting up its shipping and logistics services. TikTok has to prove that it really can handle the experience from discovery to delivery, which is uncharted territory for a US-based social platform. Of course, Amazon has also set the bar really high for this. We expect, convenient, very fast delivery, and TikTok has to step up its game to make sure that it compete among that. TikTok's marketplace also has a lot to prove. It really is a jarring departure from the entertaining and engaging experience in the rest of the app. It also has a counterfeit problem that it needs to solve. And we also know that some of the deep discounting and low quality, even if not counterfeit goods, tend to be pretty off-putting to some merchants and also to some buyers. So looking ahead, one thing that could accelerate TikTok's flywheel is its recent push into search. So we already know that more young people in particular are starting their product searches on TikTok. See this data here from Jungle Scout, which shows that about 43% of Gen Zers said they started their online product search on the platform. That was on par with Walmart. It was still below Amazon, but still a very, very high number. Now, TikTok has started to lean into that behavior with search ads. It also has a partnership with Google, and that could help boost both ad spending and social commerce sales on the platform, thinking again about that flywheel, how all of these pieces fit together to kind of continue to grow its overall business. But it's not just TikTok that's leaning into search. It's going to be one of the biggest battlegrounds within commerce. And it's also putting social commerce and e-commerce into more direct competition. You're going to see these companies really battling out for more search dollars, but there is something that really important to keep in mind. One of the reasons, or the biggest reason that people are turning to social media for search is because they don't necessarily want a list of links. They don't want a list of product images. They want to be inspired through social media. They want to see real people. They want to see creators who aren't just showing them products, but really showing them how to style them or how to use them as well. And just to show, how this is not just limited to TikTok, Facebook Marketplace and Instagram already also host search ads, and they're among the most developed in this arena already. So finally, I want to leave you with some key takeaways. And the first is that there is a long runway for social commerce growth. Despite the fact that we are seeing a slowdown in new buyer growth, sales continue to rise fast, and social commerce is just getting stickier. A lot of effort and energy should be focused, though, on re-engaging these new buyers or these existing buyers, particularly on platforms where they're spending a lot of time. Inspiration, again, is the key factor in getting users to click buy. I like to talk about the 3 E's, and that is engaging, entertaining, and educational creative, because that is so vital to stop the scroll. And that's true whether it's creator, organic, or paid content. TikTok Shop could be a really big hit among Gen Z. Its prowess in media and its stronghold among creators could help catapult it to success. But of course, it still has a lot of hurdles to overcome. And finally, we saw that search is starting to blend social and e-commerce, although there are going to be some differences in that experience. And the platforms still have a lot to prove in the search arena. And the winning social platform will need more features that advertisers expect, things like keyword bidding and targeting. And with that, Jeremy, I want to send it back to you. I know you have a great discussion with Sarah coming up, and I'm excited to hear it.
Yeah, you are not incorrect. We do have one. And that was great, by the way. So thank you so much, Jasmine. And before we get to your questions live, we've had some really good ones so far, by the way, but keep them coming. I'd love to bring back our special guest, Sarah Hiraki, Head of Creative, EMEA and APAC at Smartly.io. Welcome again, Sarah.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was so interesting. I will be citing this research in months and months to come, I think.
Well, we will be sending you the notes afterwards, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you, so Jasmine spoke about the rise of social search and how most people don't go to social media with the intent to buy. They're inspired to do so from the content they engage with, So can you talk to me about the role of the quality of, creative that drives people to engage? How are brands and platforms investing in strong creative?
Absolutely. They're putting a lot of their money and time into investing in really strong creative, which for me, maybe selfishly, is super, super exciting to see. I think for a while there with digital marketing, a lot of us were a little bit afraid of a race to the bottom. And this emphasis on creative quality, on building trust, on the 3 E's, keeping things engaging and entertaining and educational, this has really buoyed creative quality, I think, and it's going to save the internet experience, I think, for a lot of folks. We know that according to Nielsen, 70% of ad performance is down to creative quality, which is really great to hear. And brands are placing a lot of value on this because they know that that is what is going to decide whether an audience sticks around past 3 or 4 seconds to engage with their brand, to learn more about their product, and ultimately transact. We know that product review, that testimonial, styling tutorials, it could take so many different shapes, but really the thing that we know for sure is that creative really does drive performance. What we're doing at Smartly with brands is really setting our product kind of in the center of the table. And we're seeing brands really collaborate with us, with their creative teams and agencies, and with creators to make creative that will really kind of prove its own value when it goes live. So yes, we're seeing a greater emphasis on the strategy, the storytelling that goes into these ads than I think we have seen in the past with other kind of shoppable formats on other channels.
So wanted to ask you, one of the things that we've seen a lot of data on is that, there is definitely value that creators and authenticity both play in getting consumers to engage and to buy. Can you talk to me a bit about that?
Totally. I'm very proud to be a content creator. So I'm very pro content creator when it comes to their involvement in the marketing process. We've really moved from this kind of culture of brand loyalty, maybe of our parents' generation, to one of brand trust. So when trust is a barrier to shopping, it's even more important to address with believable, likable, relatable figures in your content. And that's where tapping into the creator economy and creator networks really comes in. It's so critical to address this head on in messaging so that your audience believes you and they don't feel like you're trying to hide something. There's a bit of a misconception that Gen Z or younger audiences are less loyal, but really I like to kind of flip it the other way and say that they're more willing to try new things. They're more willing to experiment with new brands. And that keyword of inspiration is really, really prevalent when it comes to approaching these audiences. So as long as brands can come to the table with a message that is authentic and resonant, the consumers are really open to receiving that message. They're open to sticking around and watching and buying things that are relevant. I loved that stat that the biggest draw to buy is just that I saw something I liked, which is shockingly simple, but I think we've all had that moment with scrolling social media, being inspired, immediately hitting the buy button just because it felt like such a good fit. And so content and creation plays this excellent role in really unlocking that kind of eureka moment for consumers. I think it's interesting that consumers are increasingly savvy, and you could kind of frame them as quite like skeptical even or kind of jaded. But I think it's really driven the creative quality up. Again, like authenticity is now completely necessary if you want to reassure your audiences that they're going to get what they're promised. And authenticity now becomes the best sales pitch, the best closer for all ad creative.
Well said. I want to go back to something that you said about stopping the scroll. And so there is obviously a lot of interruptive, social commerce ad creative, of course. But Jasmine predicted that search will be the next big battleground for social commerce. And we know that often users don't dip into social platforms with the intent to purchase. So do you think that these two behaviors are going to remain entirely distinct on social channels, or are they going to start to blur together a bit more?
I think they're going to start blurring together a bit more. I think a lot of that will come down to the infrastructure that's provided by these networks. So how easy is it to follow on with a search after you're inspired or after you're browsing? But I was thinking about it earlier, and it kind of reminds me of social media is the new mall. When I used to go with my friends and browse different brands, and they would you turn a corner and there they are. This need to browse and participate in social commerce, I think is just kind of a new space all in its own. Audiences are really hungry for information, for inspiration. They want to have fun while they're shopping for these things. Even kind of as you mentioned, if it's toilet paper, the number of people who have bought toilet paper on TikTok is incredible. Even if it's boring things, that experience can make it more fun. And those kind of inspiring kind of cycles from having a little spark of inspiration to searching to find out more, getting inspired again, discovering a new product. Those things, I think those behaviors really go hand in hand, even if maybe we're not thinking about search and commerce immediately hand in hand. But I think to do that, brands really have to step forward with the why. So really telling me a story about why I need a product. So for example, if I'm Levi's, you don't just want to like throw a pair of jeans in my face and say, these are jeans, they're a certain price point. Instead, you want to tell me ways that I can interact with them, ways that they're going to be relevant to my life. So maybe it's styling tips, how to care for my denim, even introducing me to the person that made the jeans. And you're building up this kind of relationship between me as a consumer and your brand on these platforms, so that when I think of denim or I think of your category, I'm more likely to return to this platform, to seek you out, to follow you, and then to search and eventually buy when I have that kind of layer of intent already. And of course, really important to give people really engaging results, all laddering up to great creative.
That's fantastic. I just want to ask you quickly one extra question. It's 2023, so we can't go an hour without talking about generative AI. So what role do you see Gen AI playing in executing the quality creative needed for operating in a new shoppable media reality?
It definitely has a role. Gen AI is a very real thing, and it's been happening very, very quickly all around us. There was a recent Forrester study that said that 68% of marketers are already adopting Gen AI capabilities for things like creative optimization, which I think if you had maybe posed that question a couple of years ago, I mean, maybe Jasmine would have called it, but I don't know that I would have called it at that point. So it's very exciting to see it move so quickly. This year, Smartly launched our AI lab to help kind of power this adoption. And we're really doing that on kind of two fronts. So there's obviously things like that folks are more familiar with. So image and text generation to create ads and create ad assets. But also, I think one of the things I'm really excited about is the kind of behind the scenes stuff. So asset management, measurement, tagging assets, maybe like fatigue prediction. And what we want to do is kind of wrap the existing creative process, not replace it, but wrap it in all these tools so that we can make the act of making ads less of a grind, less boring, less data entry, more about getting to that great storytelling, being strategic, being truly data-driven when you do have that data to draw from. And I think to that point, AI tools are only as good as the information that they can pull from. And so when you have everything in one place, we're really seeing that there's a lot of consolidation here too that has to align with the adoption of AI tools. So if you've got everything in one place, you're going to have a much more powerful result. Again, Forrester says that 80% of marketers are trying to bring things together when it comes to different channels, different data sources, different creative tools. And so that I think we're predicting is the future for the way things are going.
So that was really fantastic. Let's get to the audience Q&A without wasting any further time. We've received a lot of really great questions. One thing I want to ask both of you, are there any particular brands that you think are doing a noteworthy job with interesting creative on social? And obviously these can be clients of yours, Sarah, or not, totally up to you.
For sure. Some of my favorites that Smartly's worked with have been Uber. We were one of their kind of first partners when they really wanted to tackle TikTok head on. We've done everything with them from localizing video on TikTok to telling a B2B story on TikTok, which I think is quite interesting. And I think to kind of go with some of the research, I think one of the next opportunities might be things like, how do you sell higher ticket items? How do you sell B2B products in channels like this? One of my favorite brands that we work with is Vestiaire Collective. They're a designer resale site. And so it becomes a really interesting creative puzzle to use creator authenticity to talk about authentic products that we're selling, authentic designer goods, and they're at a higher price point. So the challenge of building that trust becomes really, really interesting to unpick. And then, of course, just from a video editing and graphic design perspective, so many interesting things we're seeing with trends like, remixing assets, having multiple things happening on screen at once. There's a ton of really cool stuff in the advertising space purely.
I'll answer your question, Jeremy, in just a second, but I just wanted to say, Sarah, I love that you compared social commerce to a shopping mall. That's an analogy I use all the time. And I think it is just so valid and such a good way to wrap this entire discussion. But one brand that always gets me to buy on social media is Reformation. They do such a good job of having both inspiring and beautiful creative, but also tapping into trends. And I recently bought something that they had advertised as being like Meredith Blake from Parent Trap, which as a millennial, I couldn't not click. I mean, it was perfect. And again, I think this speaks to this idea of being able to understand what's going to resonate with your consumers, with your customers, particularly in your target group, and also just being able to bring in trends, inspiration, and discovery. And they just do a really good job of that for me.
Justice for Meredith Blake. I love that.
Yes.
So it sounds like, not to put word, so Jasmine, you have personally bought something via social or more than one thing.
Yes, I'm a really big Instagram shopper and buyer. I go there both. Well, I don't necessarily go there to be inspired, but I am inspired by a lot of the content that I see on Instagram. And I also buy. I've not ever used Meta Checkout itself. So I'm clicking through primarily from stories. And so I bought the Meredith Blake outfit. And at the same time, I actually bought the sweater that I'm wearing right now.
And the best thing is you can expense all of it because it's research.
No.
Okay. Sarah, how about for
wish.
you? This is more my question, and then we'll get to some more. But anything come to mind for on your end?
Yeah, I love like discovering brands, especially through, I would say, like TikTok and TikTok Shop. I love the connection there with like independent, women-owned, minority-owned businesses. And I think that's really inspiring for me. I think I'm the classic kind of discovery, research, purchase looper. And I often go through multiple cycles of that behavior that I, as an advertiser, know about. And then I'm also like really pleasantly surprised when I'm retargeted with something that I actually want to buy. Especially important during like wedding season when you're looking for things to wear to weddings and you're like surfing around frantically trying to find stuff. I'm definitely I've used the utility of these behaviors a lot.
And that's
Well,
such an important point because the path to purchase from social media is not linear. And a lot of times it does take reminders through retargeting to get people to actually complete the purchase because it doesn't always happen immediately.
we have another question which ties into, admittedly some of my social commerce behavior. Is I notice I'm more likely to fall for something if it's from a micro influencer with really strong creative that's going to resonate with me. And we've seen some data on this on our end. But for both of you, what's the value of micro influencers versus major influencers and celebrities when it comes, to inspiring social commerce purchases? Are there any benefits to going smaller if you're a brand?
Totally. At Smartly, we have an entire workflow that is built around kind of micro influencers and content creators. We like to refer to them as content creators because we tend to use them for their creative prowess rather than their media presence. But yeah, I think they're very dedicated. They're super agile. There's such a huge and diverse network to work with. And so when you're picking personalities that will fit well with your audience, they're not all going to be extremely wealthy, glamorous, model perfect, human beings. They're not going to be TV famous. I want an authentic personality and voice, and I want someone that is relatable. And so they're an amazing resource to use as kind of creative consultants for what you're doing, to be genuine advocates for your product. We often seek out people who already have a relationship with a brand that we like. They're already a fan. And so it comes off as more natural. And of course, they don't come with the same strings and budgets as these like super famous influencers. And so the value that you can derive from them is massive. And I always encourage the brands that we work with to really treasure that partnership and to foster that partnership.
And the other thing I always say, when you're thinking about creator economy and smaller influencers in particular, is that being a content creator is now a career path, right? So these people are still growing their audiences. And one of the ways in which they're monetizing, or the primary way in which they're monetizing, is really through brand sponsorships. So they want brand deals just as much as brands want to have deals with creators. And that gets different as, creators grow, because they can diversify their revenue streams as well. So they may not be as reliant on brands and the social platforms. And it's really good to get in early with some of these smaller creators, because they are continuing to grow their audiences. And then once they do get bigger, these brand partnerships continue to seem authentic because they've been with them from the get-go.
Totally.
So we have one question I think is really interesting. Any thoughts about YouTube's role in social commerce? Because I think that that's certainly a platform that a lot of our listeners today engage with and have a lot of customers on.
I love ads on YouTube. I think YouTube has that unique connection to the big screen, which is really nice. So you can have those big brand moments with a 30-second or a 6-second or 15-second ad on my TV. I've even started watching YouTube Shorts on my TV, which is kind of a strange experience, but here we are. So I think YouTube, through creators, but also through their ad stock, gives you a really robust and kind of well-rounded approach to telling a brand story. And certainly influencers or creators on YouTube have a massive impact, and they've accrued, at this point, decades of trust with their audiences. Like, there are people that have grown up with these folks. And so you really can't put a price on that level of trust and loyalty that they've cultivated.
I think that's true. And I mean, YouTube really is the OG of creator and influencer platforms. And in many ways, it's the OG of social commerce too, when you're thinking back to affiliate linking. I think particularly when it comes to working with creators, there's some hesitation still among brands. A YouTube video tends to be a heavier lift than, a short video on TikTok or an image post on Instagram. And so, it's really thinking about price and resources. But I think Shorts, which you brought up, Sarah, is, such a great point, because that is lowering the barrier to entry. And what I'm hearing from a lot of brands and advertisers right now is that they're starting to look even more closely at YouTube and really starting to think about how to invest there better.
So just a follow-up question that popped up, breaking news, new question, follow-up. Okay, speaking of YouTube, how are you seeing YouTube Shorts shape up compared to TikTok or Instagram Reels when it comes to time spent per user? And just to kind of, massage that question a little bit, like, how do you think as a brand, if you're, developing YouTube creative, but you also want it to feel, you want to cut it right to feel organic to YouTube Shorts, which is an entirely different format?
It's a good one. I don't know about time spent in particular. We know people spend hours and hours and hours watching YouTube on a daily basis. I'm certainly guilty of that. I think Shorts, every vertical video platform, even though it's all vertical video, they're not all cut the same. The culture of each platform is different. So it's a different look and feel on Reels, on TikTok, on Shorts. And so you really just need to tap into what you think your audience is into. I think on YouTube, we tend to see a lot of DIY, a lot of educational content. People search how to do something on YouTube in the same way that they're beginning to or have been on TikTok. And I think, again, providing that utility for audiences, it's maybe less of an entertainment platform in that case, and more of a learning, a seeking, a searching platform. I think people are very used to that search behavior, kind of going back to the other point on channels like YouTube Shorts.
So Sarah, I think you and I are one and the same. My tagline that I go to all the time is, you can replicate the technology, but you can't replicate the culture. And I think that is incredibly important when you're thinking about short video platforms. I don't have a time spent forecast to share, but we do have a forecast for YouTube Shorts viewers. And what we're seeing is that the number of YouTube Shorts viewers is actually higher than TikTok. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that YouTube just has a massive reach already. And we're seeing, YouTube viewers of long video also looking at Shorts. And I think that's, another thing that's really unique about YouTube is a lot of the Shorts creators are long form video creators, and they're cutting down or creating new content for shorts, but they already have these audiences through the long form videos that they create, and they can then transfer those audiences into shorts. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But hopefully one day we'll be able to actually forecast how much time people are spending there.
We have another question about, specific examples, and this is actually more so about industries. Are there any specific industries that you've seen perform best when it comes to TikTok shoppable content, like, for example, beauty or fashion, and anything else that you can think of?
I think anything visual can really work well on these channels. Anything that has a great payoff. I think as Jasmine referenced earlier, even things like cleaning products, they have that oddly satisfying kind of quality to them. Anything you can unbox, touch, you can make an ASMR video out of. And brands, I think, are getting really creative with how they stretch the definition of that. It's well beyond just beauty, fashion, food. We never would have expected that pickles would be a hot item on TikTok Shop, and here we are. But I've also seen apps and kind of life hacking content really blow up, maybe not necessarily on TikTok Shop, but in terms of acquiring audiences, acquiring consumers from these channels. So dating apps, huge. You can tell a story. Fintech is huge on these platforms. Even things like life insurance, you're kind of educating and pulling in audiences that maybe you wouldn't initially expect through this type of social commerce.
I think that speaks back to something that you mentioned earlier about, storytelling. It's all about, making sure that you're telling a story around your product. Particularly on TikTok, it's really important to include creators in that storytelling aspect. And then, thinking back to the 3 E's, anything that's engaging, entertaining, and educational, like a life hack, for example, as long as you're creating that kind of content, I think there really is a place for almost any industry on TikTok. And we've already seen that even before the launch of TikTok Shop, is that it really opened up social commerce to a lot of industries that weren't necessarily thinking about it before, and bringing them into this experience. And one that is, not necessarily blowing up on TikTok Shop, but something that I've seen a lot more brands lean into is B2B. I see a lot of B2B content, and at least on my TikTok feed.
Absolutely. I know I'm going for a lot of social commerce SaaS purchases where they say it's free to try, $19.99 to, per month afterwards. And then I just fall for it, and I'm sticking with it for years. I'm scared to look at my credit card bill. But I will ask you, staying on the topic of TikTok, both of you, and maybe Jasmine, you might have some data or some really good thoughts here. Just to play around with the wording of this, there is a lack of trust in social platforms in general, but there's also certain kind of trust concerns, warranted or not, when it comes to TikTok. So are those who just trust less not using TikTok in general, or does TikTok have a trust problem that other social platforms might not have?
All the social platforms have a trust problem. I think, TikTok's is being exacerbated by a lot of the discussions around, its connection to China and the potential of a TikTok ban earlier this year. I do think, what we saw is that is not an issue for TikTok's core user base, which are younger people. They really do love and continue to spend time on TikTok, and we haven't seen them really stop doing so as a result. In fact, when I was talking to, Gen Zers around that time, many of them were already coming up with workarounds on how they would be able to continue to access TikTok should it be banned in the US. And some of them were so creative and innovative, I was shocked. So yes, TikTok has a trust issue. I think, some of the problems that it still needs to solve with TikTok Shop are, crucial that they get solved quickly because of this, but it's not limited to that. And, all the social platforms really have to work to improve that trust.
I've also, I think too, that loved seeing the trend of transparency from these platforms. I think we've seen that demonstrated that they do care that we have that level of trust, we have that level of security and transparency. And so things, especially as an advertiser, knowing that my powers are not unlimited. And as a consumer, as an audience, that I have control over what I share. And I think overall, it's just a cultural shift. Like I'm very comfortable doing mobile banking, whereas my parents or grandparents would say absolutely not. So I think as long as people are informed and aware of what they're sharing, what they're getting, it all becomes a value exchange. And I think it's a cultural one.
Absolutely.
So we've got time for one more question. And, since we're talking after Halloween and some of us have a few pounds of uneaten candy at home, we are now officially very much in the holiday season. So does social commerce over-index or under-index when it comes to holiday shopping? And I'll just throw in very quickly a stat that I saw that 36% say that they will use TikTok for holiday shopping. But amongst those 18 to 29, that number is actually 53%. So does social commerce play an oversized role in gifting?
I would imagine it would. Yeah, I think people are kind of continuing that shopping mall metaphor. I would personally much rather enjoy an experience of sharing things with my friends, comparing notes, getting advice from creators I like, and shopping through social than hauling myself to a mall and carrying bags around. I think we're all very used to that behavior now, going through the pandemic and everything. And I would say that we're also not just shopping for gifts, we're not just shopping for other people, but we're also shopping for ourselves. We're nesting, we're making our houses right. We're looking for outfits, for interesting ways to celebrate, different foods, different cultural ways to celebrate. And I think all of that becomes wrapped up in that inspiration and then purchase kind of story, where we're not just looking for a thing to buy, we're looking for an experience that we want to have. And I think social commerce is a natural fit there.
I think that's absolutely right. And I mean, those TikTok stats that you just shared, Jeremy, are, really amazing. And to that, I would say there's a reason that TikTok, launched TikTok Shop when it did, just ahead of the holiday shopping season. I mean, it is, a really important season for brands and retailers. I think this year consumers are particularly concerned about spending. So, it was a good time for TikTok to come in, really begin to grow its footprint by offering a lot of discounts and subsidizing those discounts to merchants, because they knew that people would be looking for discounts and looking to be inspired for holiday presents.
So that's a lot of great content. And unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. We could talk about this for hours longer. Thanks again to Jasmine for joining us, and a very special thanks to Sarah and to the team at Smartly.io. Also, our Studio II crew, the eMarketer production team, also deserves a huge thank you for making this webinar possible. As promised, we'll be emailing you a link to today's slides along with a full recording of the session, so keep an eye out for that. But before we wrap up, let me just take a quick moment to tell you what's happening across eMarketer's upcoming events. Mark your calendar for this Friday, November 3rd, for Attention, our half-day live virtual summit, focusing on trends and predictions for 2024. Registration is open on our events page. And while you're on that page, you can also register for upcoming live Analyst and Tech Talk webinars at emarketer.com/webinars. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.